What is up, everybody? We are back. It is the Shout Buffalo Football Podcast, back in your life. I'm Matt Parrino, joined as always by Ryan Talbot, and we are locked and loaded for a fresh episode of Shout after a week off. Went to New York City, did the family thing. Now we're going to get this thing cranked up again because, Ryan, we're T-minus 9 days until training camp. This thing is sneaking up on us like never before, and we're bringing in the big guns. By request, I asked you guys to, kind of shout us out, send me an email, send me a DM. Who do you want to come on the show? And John Kryk from the Toronto Sun was a popular choice. So, John, welcome in and thank you for joining us.
I'm flattered. Again, I always enjoy coming out with you guys, and you know your stuff, and you guide me through all this, so it's all really good. I'm not Mr. Tech, okay? I still got a written daytimer, so it just shows you how much of a Luddite I am. But you guys pilot me through this.
Very good. Speaking of piloting us through this, Ryan Talbot, we are brought to you by Value Home Centers. And right now, if you text VALUE, VALU, to 80692, that signs you up for Value's text program. You will start receiving exclusive coupons. You'll get weekly deals and so much more. Value Home Centers, they got everything you need to get after one of those projects you got to get done. I know you're probably working on something over there, Ryan Talbot.
Oh, without a doubt. There's always work to be done around the Talbot household.
All right. So where do you want to start, Ryan? I will hand you the keys.
Yeah. So John, Matt mentioned training camp 9 days away. In terms of storylines, in your opinion, what's the biggest storyline that you're keeping an eye on as camp kicks off?
You mean Bills or the whole league?
Bills related first. Yes.
Well, we want to see the cornerback, and then we got to make sure that the other one comes back, right? If the rookie, Elam, how do you pronounce his first name, guys? Is it Kyer? Yeah. If he's all the deal as a first-round pick, I mean, then does that mean that Tre'Davious has to be the guy right out of the gates? It's going to be real hard. I mean, you listen to the experts, the medical experts. They say, if you've got a position where burst and positional flexibility on the field, I don't mean by position, player position, but moving around, you need burst going in any direction suddenly. Sometimes it takes those guys a whole year to come back. So can Tre'Davious be the Tre'Davious that we saw before he blew out his ACL? That's got to be one of the top, if not the top concern for the Bills, because if they have those two, we know what they did up front defensively, and I'd like to talk about that in relation to the schedule, why I think exactly they did that. And I think I bet the Bills coaches just can't wait to send out this new look up front defense this season, see how they do.
That's really interesting that you start there, because I think that within the fan base, there's almost this, I'll say majority that kind of think that it's going to be plug and play for Tre'Davious White, right? Like we've heard from the coaching staff, we've heard from Brandon Beane talk about the work that he's been doing behind the scenes. I mean, if you talk to anybody that knows Tre'Davious White, I mean, the work ethic, I mean, there's been plenty of stories that have been written about it. I mean, the guy just studies film when he's supposed to be playing with his daughter. He basically puts, family life on hold during the season so he can really dedicate himself to the game. I can't imagine the frustration that he has with what happened. We still haven't talked to Tre'Davious White. So in training camp, this will probably be the first chance we get to sit down and kind of recap what went on. We still haven't really covered all of that from his perspective. We've gotten the player's point of view, the heartbreak of it down the stretch, a Super Bowl contender that has to go into the playoffs without one of their leaders. Now we're at that phase where, all right, he's probably getting close to the point where he can get back on a football field. But what it looks like, Ryan, it's anybody's guess what that's going to look like.
Yeah, and to John's point, listen, there's certain things you have to do to be an elite cornerback in this league, and White, pre-injury, was able to do that. Does he have the confidence? Does he have the burst? Is he able to look like the Trey White of old out of the gate? History says no, and when you look at other players that have come back from this injury, it's something that's gradual. It takes time. It might be mid-season before he returns to form. The silver lining for the Bills here is, one, they drafted Kyer Elam in round 1. This is another guy that kept a notebook of what he did well, what he could learn from. Kind of seemed like Trey White in that regard in terms of the work that he was putting in at the college level. And then you have Dane Jackson. Dane Jackson, to his credit, when he was plugged in last year in that cornerback spot, I thought he fared very well for the Bills opposite Levi Wallace at that point. And obviously the safety duo of Hyde and Poyer play a big role in that. The fact that you can bring out two cornerbacks that no proven number one guy. And for the most part, up until that Kansas City game in the playoffs, the cornerback position, in my opinion, played pretty well.
What were your initial thoughts, John, when the Bills signed Von Miller? Because for us, people that are super glued into this team, how, expectations, putting out all those primers for free agency completely threw us through a loop. I mean, Chandler Jones was somebody that we're talking quite a bit about, and maybe some of those second tier pass rushers, the Emmanuel Ogbas of the world. But the Bills go out, Brandon Beane goes out and reels in really the top fish, which I think a lot of people thought was on his way back to the Rams. And if not the Rams, probably home to Denver or a big market like Dallas.
Right.
Everything's been, we could talk about the recent, kind of uprising of Bills Mafia about how Von Miller, arrived at this decision and the fact that he kind of second guessed it. But the fact that they have him now, they're going into the season with what I believe is still a premier pass rusher. Your thoughts on how that all transpired?
Yeah, I was surprised, pleasantly surprised, especially for Bills fans. I know I've got a lot of them up here, including my boss is a big Bills fan. So, I always have some lively conversations with him, especially after the loss of Kansas City, but we don't want to go there. Boy, my ear burned for about 3 days after that. It was tough. But if you look at what Von Miller did with the Rams, he's coming off injury about the time he got traded, right, from Denver. And he wasn't that effective right away, either, in the stats, if all you're looking at is Pro Football Reference, or if you're actually watching some of it. But by December, he was almost at a sack a week pace. And I think it was actually, if I remember from my Super Bowl preview copy, by the time he hit early December, he was Von Miller again. At least that's how he looked, and his stats kind of bore that out. So if the Bills are getting that guy, everybody knows in Western New York and Central Ontario and everywhere beyond who's a big Bills fan that they needed help with the pass rush, especially late in games. And Von Miller is going to bring you up that way. I'd be shocked if he didn't have a great season for the Bills. I'm not saying he's going to get 15 sacks, but he's going to be impactful, and he's going to be impactful at the right times. Because from what he did in the playoffs, and especially in the Super Bowl, there was nowhere. In the NFC Championship game, actually almost even more than that down the stretch. Jimmy Garoppolo didn't have time to do anything. And then, of course, now to Joe Burrow in the second half of the Super Bowl. So if he can do even 80% of that, I think the Bills are going to be, and all their fans will be really happy with Von Miller. And we've seen that with Brandon Beane. Oh, we need that. It's almost like you get conditioned sometimes in a fan base that we're going to go out and get everything but that one thing, or those two things that we need. And Brandon Beane has proved in 5 years that, we need some receivers. Like 3 years ago, he goes out and gets receivers. Need to block for Josh Allen better to give him a chance. He goes and signs a bunch of veterans that they kind of patch it together that first year, but still they improved. So he's going to do what has to be done. And if he's got the cap room, as he now usually does, to make a big splash, he's going to go and get that guy.
John, follow up. You mentioned the fan base. Some of the fan base members have been a little upset the last week or so with Von Miller for comments that he's made. I would have taken less money to go to the Cowboys, referring to the Denver Broncos as we. I mean, he spent the majority of his career there. The comments about how he was really torn about leaving the Rams. Is that refreshing in your opinion to hear an athlete be that open and honest? Should the fans really be that upset that he has been that upfront in terms of his thinking and that process that he went through in free agency?
Yeah, I think we probably, all of us, especially us in the media, tend to now overinflate some things that athletes say. Honesty is always refreshing. It's kind of ironic that we're talking about this tonight, because this morning in my weekly newsletter, I wrote about Baker Mayfield and how, I don't know if you saw some of his comments yesterday, being introduced via Zoom news conference to the Panthers media. He was saying all the right things. It was like it was Tom Brady or Peyton Manning in their 15th season, just, taking a a tennis racket to these little balloon balls that are thrown up by the press and knocking them down. And are you bitter against the Browns? No. I had 4 good years there. He said all of the right things, and so part of me rewarded him for that. And it's like, because I think he needs to be that type of a leader that the players can and the team can rally behind, let alone the fans. But it's funny that, part of me was also a little wistful. It's like, yeah, but I kind of like that old Baker Mayfield who would say anything that was on his mind, right? So I guess we can all be of two minds on those things. But in the end, no one's going to remember this come the first preseason game, let alone the first regular season game.
Mm-hmm. I want to also, speaking of follow-ups, back up a little bit to another thing that you said about Brandon Beane and kind of dive into that a little bit more. We have now quite a large sample size to analyze when it comes to Beane and the way that this build has happened. I mean, you listen to a lot of the national folks talk about the Bills as this blueprint, right? That a lot of other teams are going to try to go out and find their quarterback, build around that quarterback, but also really address both sides of the line. What we're seeing now with Brandon Beane, to your point, is somebody that isn't afraid, alongside with Sean McDermott, definitely, but isn't afraid to find out, where there are liabilities and then quickly pivot off of maybe a direction they were going. Early on, we saw it with the wide receivers when they were going, originally with these big body, large target, catch radius guys. They said, okay, this isn't working. We're going to go to the Smurfs, right? The little speedy guys. Defensive line, they went with, go with numbers. We throw with 8, 9 different people out on the rotation. We'll just throw fresh bodies at you. That wasn't working. Now they go out and get a premier guy in Von Miller. I mean, is Brandon Beane, in your estimation now, somebody that covers the NFL, is he really one of the top GMs in the league? And can other teams emulate what's happened here, replicate it?
Oh, I think they already are. Absolutely, they already are. You look at what they've done. I mean, he had to get the cap under control first, and made some bold moves. I mean, getting rid of Sammy Watkins and others at the time, if I recall, was like there was enough disappointment in what Sammy was doing that there was some disappointment. But if he himself had drafted him, which I don't think he would have done, I don't think he would have traded up, then maybe you don't do some of those bold moves when he got there. But how he and Sean are going about this as a partnered duo, I think that we will see more of that, and not just because of their success, but because it works. It's either you have a czar, right? You've got Andy Reid, or you got a Pete Carroll or Bill Belichick, who's not directing their GMs, but they're very much saying, this is what I need. Go get me that. The year, last time I was at a training camp, any of us were at a training camp as far as, some in-depth access was 2019. And I was at Kansas City's first day there. And I remember Mecole Hardman walking in and everybody talking to him. Why did they get Mecole Hardman? Because if you remember that offseason, Tyreek Hill had that domestic incident with his his pregnant future wife, and there was uncertainty as to whether he would come back. I'm sure Andy Reid, before the draft, when that was well known by then, said to Brett Veach, get me another Tyreek Hill. And they did. That was their either, I think it was second round pick, but I think it might have been their first choice of that draft. At any rate, so I think you either have a czar or you have two guys that get along, because the Bills during the drought sure saw a lot of examples, more than anyone wants to recount or remember, of what happens when your GM and your head coach aren't on the same page, or whoever the head talent football guy in the office is with the head coach. There's all the strife. Nobody wants to remember that. But this works. And I think this is a model that if you're going to have a two-headed monster instead of one, then I don't know what they could be doing any better after 5 years of what they're doing. The roster, as you say, is everybody's just frothing over it. They're going to be on the cover of these magazines coming out. It's going to be Josh Allen and probably Matthew Stafford and Patrick Mahomes on the cover of most of these mags. We don't get them as early as you do there. You might already have them at your newsstands in the States. But I expect that that'll be the case, and that they're already a lot of people's picks to win the Super Bowl. And it's not smoke and mirrors. They've got a solid roster that they went and improved in this past off season impressively.
Yeah, and it's funny to think back on that, trading away your number one wide receiver and cornerback back-to-back same day within an hour of each other because it was Ronald Darby and Sammy Watkins both gone. Right. And, for a regime that was new, that was a risky play, and obviously it paid off. But, John, before we get away from Von Miller, D-line, you said something early on about something you thought was interesting about the way they built up this roster and free agency, and it had to do with the schedule. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that now.
Yeah, well, okay. So I'll refer to a couple notes here, all right? So I'm not looking away to be rude. But look at what they did in the defensive line. I thought that was impressive. And I'm just speculating here, and maybe they talked about this at some point in the offseason that I missed, but I don't believe they did. So you've got Von Miller. That's the edge. That's the pass rush. But what else did Buffalo struggle at, especially down the stretch and especially against New England? Stopping the run. Saw it against Indianapolis. And for a head coach, and I believe Bean as well, they want to win a certain way. They want to be tough. They want to be defensively sound. And yes, Buffalo went into the playoffs with the statistical number one defense. I don't think anybody came away from the playoffs believing that they had the best defense in 2021 in the NFL. They didn't. And I believe that they went ahead and look at the roster, look at the teams we're playing, and look at what are they likely to try to run more this year or not? Or do they just have a great running back that we want to stop? So first week, Rams, their receiver core isn't what it was last year, right? They've got Cooper Kupp. They're probably not going to have OBJ, or if they do, he's not going to be ready to go. And they traded away the other ACL, Robert Woods, to Tennessee. So they're not going to have what I always think you have to have to make a quarterback look the best and have the offense function most properly. You have to have 3 elite receiving targets. When you have that, like Brady at Tampa Bay in 2020, for instance, I mean, Scotty Miller might have even been the 4th if you want the way he was playing with his little Smurfy speedy self, to use your term. But you look at what Buffalo's first opponents, so the Rams, they're probably going to run more. I look at them and go, all right, quickly, are they going to try to run more because I always like to with McVay? Yes. Will they test Buffalo defensively against the run? Yes. That's week 1. Tennessee, did you say more? They rank 5th in rushing, and they've got Derrick Henry. Of course they're going to try to run it. Miami, I expect they will, especially with the core running backs that they just got, right? Edmonds, everybody else. The 4th, Baltimore. They were 3rd in the NFL in rushing, and they lost like their top 8 running backs, all with ACL tears by August. Right. I mean, it was crazy, right? And that yet, even though Lamar Jackson's not the whole running game, they're still 3rd. Are they going to try to run it against the Bills? Are they going to test it? Sure. Okay. Now we're into October. Pittsburgh. They don't have Big Ben anymore, and they lost Juju Smith-Schuster. Absolutely, they're going to run it more. They should have run it more last year, but they definitely will now, I believe, with whoever ends up winning the quarterback battle. All right, now we're into mid-October at Kansas City. Yeah, one of the, if you want to call it a sleeper acquisitions, Ronald Jones, I always thought was fabulous with the Bucs the last 2-3 seasons. And I always thought he was underrated. And when they brought in, why is his name eluding? Fournette from Jacksonville. It almost diminished Jones's role. I mean, Fournette was playing fabulously, both out of the backfield as well as not running, which he didn't do in Jacksonville. But I thought Jones was really underrated. And so I think they might run it maybe a little more, especially with Tyreek Hill gone, right? Then you got to buy the Bills. And then Devil's Night, we're at the end of October, Green Bay. Who do they have? Aaron Jones. November 6th at the Jets. There's your center green circle on your bingo card. November 13th, Minnesota, Dalvin Cook, one of the best running backs in the league. And then after that, Cleveland. So going into the game in Detroit on Thanksgiving, almost every week you could make an argument, and this is before even playing the Patriots twice at the end of the season, you could make the argument that everybody's going to try to test that front. And I think they didn't know what order they were going to get these guys in, obviously, when they made these decisions, because the schedule didn't come out until May. But I believe Bean and McDermott went, people are going to test us that way. And if our cornerbacks just, with the young one, and if Trey can't come up to speed right away, we better at least damn well better stop the run. And I think that is what informed those off-season veteran moves inside, getting DeQuan Jones, Jordan Phillips. That was important stuff. And I believe that that's really going to help them.
It's so interesting that you bring that up. I was over my vacation, I was listening to Eric Wood's appearance on Bussin' with the Boys, and I thought if you're a Bills fan and you haven't checked that out yet, I mean, there's some really good, intel on there that Eric Wood shared. I mean, he's super plugged in with the Bills even still. He does the radio broadcast, but he said Daquan Jones, Roger Saffold address toughness on both sides of the line. And that's something that he even admitted was a priority going into the offseason after what happened last year. And I think that they've been trying to build that, to your point, John, for years. They haven't had the right components there to make it kind of happen. And when they lost Jordan Phillips and Shaq Lawson, not only did they lose a lot of toughness back in 2019, they also lost kind of the heart and soul of the defensive line. Like, Ed Oliver's a really fun, nice, exciting young player, but he's not the guy that's going to like supercharge the line, right? Like, he's going to win most of the time with flash, with athleticism, with speed, with quickness. And usually, when you're an undersized guy like that, you probably can't take a lot of time to spend, after the play, getting, in some of that extracurricular stuff. You got to get right back to the line and get after it again. He's at a disadvantage every time he rushes against some of these guards in the league. Now, he's a good player, but I think you get my point. Yeah. And so what they did is, to your point, is they went out there and they just got really beefy, really nasty. I think the early things that I've heard about Daquan Jones are that he's a guy that offensive linemen just hate when they see that he's on the schedule. And now that you have a little bit of that toughness, that can maybe sprinkle itself everywhere else. And in Lawson, I bring him up. Taylor Lewan on the podcast, I almost wrote a post on this, Ryan, I may still, said one of the most memorable moments of his career was when he was playing the Bills back in 19 or 18, whatever year it was. And it was a meaningless game. The Bills were, not what they are now, but he'll never forget it because he had a little bit of a tussle with Shaq Lawson in that game. And Bills Mafia still to this day do not let him off the hook on social media for that. And I thought that was a funny thing. But, toughness, energy, those are things that at times last year I thought that front was missing.
Yeah, and just sucking up onto some guards and centers and mucking up the works inside in the offensive line. You need guys that are willing to do that all game long, or within their rotation of when they get their snaps. But I just get the hunch. That's my hunch of reading their offseason moves, which I think have been. You can do that with Bean. You go back and what did they try to do this past offseason? What did they need? What were their big needs going in? And guy goes and checks those boxes, right? And so I'm looking at that going, they must have thought they really should do that. And then when the schedule came out, that's when I was looking at it and go, oh, right. They looked at who they're playing this year and went, people are going to try to run on us and try to do what New England did, right? And I mean, you don't want your safeties as trying to make 25 tackles a game, like it seemed like Hyatt especially was trying to be doing against that first game in the Wind Festival there against the Patriots. They want to stop that up front, and that's where you stop the run is up front in the front seven, and especially in the interior of the defensive line. So that was it's just a theory of mine, but that's what I kind of put together. And if it's worth 2/3 of 4/5 of nothing all, then that's what it's worth. But that's how I kind of interpreted it.
No, I think it's actually a great theory based on the schedule and everything else. But also, when you have an explosive offense like Buffalo has, what's the best way to stop that offense is to keep them off the field. Mm-hmm. So if the teams can run, that keeps Buffalo off the field. So now you bring in Daquan Jones, you bring back Jordan Phillips, you bring in a player named Tim Settle from Washington who forced his way onto the field in Washington, despite that entire defensive line being nothing but first-round players. So I think you're right on the money with what Brandon Beane did. He looked at what their weaknesses were, how they could get tougher up front, because that helps the linebacker position. That helps obviously in the secondary as well, like you said. So great observations, John. Thanks. In the AFC East, who's the biggest threat to the Bills? Is there a threat to the Bills? And if not, who's playing for second place?
I think it's going to be hard for the Patriots to hold off Miami now. I know what I just said. New England, most years when they're in a situation like this, are going to overachieve, and the Dolphins are going to be the Dolphins. Who are we kidding here, right? And I've got a new coach again, right? But I just with the sheer talent and the experienced talent that they have brought in, with the draft being practically an afterthought in so many ways. With Tyreek Hill, he alone changes some of the competitive balance within the AFC. I'm sure. I mean, I didn't listen to to the sports radio or anything during the draft. I was busy, but I figured that Bills fans must just be celebrating and almost popping the champagne corks that Patrick Mahomes doesn't have Tyreek Hill to throw to anymore. That's the good thing, but now you got to face him twice. That's not so much the good thing, right? Because he is just a special talent. Nobody has his breakaway speed, and we saw that in the playoff, late in the playoff game. That was just, was there any other receiver in the league that could have scored that quickly as he did, just streaming through that great secondary? No. I doubt that anybody else could have done what he did on that play, on just a simple pass play. But I got to think it's the Dolphins. I mean, they have the new coach, Mike McDaniel. And here's the other thing too about, if we want to continue that theory of the schedule and the defensive line, well, I expect Miami to try to run it. Maybe everyone thinks it's going to be flash and flash. Well, Mike McDaniel came from where? San Francisco. What does Kyle Shanahan, after his dad, what do they base everything in their offense around? Successful running attack. Everything offshoot is an offshoot of that. And that's how best, I believe, they can protect and get the most out of Tua, is by having a strong running attack. So I expect we're going to see that out of them. When you look at what they did in one season, I was really impressed last year with what the Patriots did with all those signees, which when you look back on it, made them better. It did make them great, right? You look what Miami did, and you can go down the list. I mean, I'm not going to do that now, but they really improved their roster at a bunch of positions. And I counter to that is, I don't see how New England got better. Is there anybody that you guys have heard that thinks New England can be even as good as they were last year? Because I don't.
No, I mean, they lose a cornerback in J.C. Jackson. The draft was pretty underwhelming. They get to the first round and they take a prospect in Cole Strange, who might end up being a great prospect, a great player, but most places had a late second, early third round grade on him. So very bizarre offseason for New England.
Yeah. And Matt Jones has to be protected too. I mean, if they losing the two guards, I mean, you automatically, I think, if you're the opponents of the Patriots going into the season going, they're not going to be able to protect him as well. And he's a young quarterback. You got to do it. So, again, I think they're going to try to run it more this year. God, I know it sounds like I'm going back to 1977 or something, but you just look at the schedule and you look at these teams and in their specific situations, and it would make sense if they did. And I think they'll run more too.
I know that Mac Jones is not even in the same mold of a quarterback as Lamar Jackson. And obviously I don't want to put them in the same caliber of player, but if you look at this offense and the way that it's constructed, I mean, Devontae Parker in his own right, I've downplayed the signing a little bit because I don't know if he necessarily fits the modern day prototype one receiver per se. And I don't think he's going to cure all their ills, but he's probably actually a better receiver than anybody Baltimore has right now. Now, Rashad Bateman, he might be somebody that can develop over the course of the season and maybe turn into something that's better than what Parker's been in this league or what he ends up being. And maybe Parker there ignites Nelson Aguilar and Kendrick Bourne. Maybe they get something going. But I look at this team, and to me, it comes down to the money they spent at the tight end position. Can they schematically, philosophically find a way to really utilize and emphasize Jonnu Smith, especially, who was invisible for most of last season, then obviously Hunter Henry.
No, I was waiting all year for the bust out game, right? Like I was, in some ways I thought, okay, the Patriots going to go back to when they had, Gronk and Hernandez, the two terrorizing tight ends, and it didn't come anywhere close to that. But Mac Jones, I think he kind of showed everybody, and just as we saw with Josh in year 3 and then again last season, accuracy really is the whole. We can talk about arms and they can set fire to the air with their arms and everything like that. Well, Jamarcus Russell could do that, and there's been a lot of quarterbacks that have the arm, but can you complete passes under pressure and find them is almost like the biggest thing of all, right? And Mac Jones was able to do that. I thought he was really one of maybe his most impressive game was against Brady in that midseason night game. He just missed by a sliver of breaking Dak Prescott's rookie record for percentage, 65.57. It was just, I think, 18 percentage points, I think it was, behind Dak Prescott. he did really well for a rookie. And yeah, I do believe, as you do, Matt, that Devontae Parker is going to help them. And if they're smart, they'll really, with their new offensive system, whatever it might end up being, they will use the tight ends a lot more and basing it off. Like, it's almost as though if Kyle Shanahan took over as offensive coordinator, he'd go, "This is my team. I got a young quarterback who's, mobile enough that can do the waggle and do play action all over the field and roll out if you want to, and he's super accurate." I mean, if you switched head coaches, almost that'd be an interesting thought experiment. But all that said, I think Miami has, on paper, a more talented team than New England, and it would surprise me if Miami doesn't finish second.
Speaking of talented teams, the crew over at Value Home Centers got you guys hooked up. Customers can shop anytime at valuehomecenters.com. Buy online, pick up today in the store. Find a huge selection of products that ship to your local store from their warehouse for free. Head over to valuehomecenters.com. Get yourself hooked up. Before we move on, Ryan, I want to hit really quickly on the New York Jets because I think they're, to me, a really interesting team. And it all, as always, comes down to what is Zach Wilson going to be in year 2, right? He's obviously been in the news the last 2 weeks. Very New York quarterback kind of headlines. But all that notwithstanding, if he takes a step, you look at on the field, you look at the talent that they've now put around him. They got what you were talking about earlier, weapons at the receiver position, Corey Davis, Elijah Moore, Garrett Wilson, Braxton Berrios. They went out and they brought in CJ Uzoma from Cincinnati, who went on a Super Bowl run last year, got some of that playoff experience, and they've gotten better on their offensive line. And if Mekhi Becton can be any type of player, this all of a sudden becomes potentially a formidable team led by a defensive-minded coach in Robert Saleh. I think they still have talented pieces on the defensive side. What do you think? What do you make of the Jets?
I agree with what you just said, just not this year. They are not just young; they are ridiculously young, extremely talented, but ridiculously young at the key offensive playmaking positions. They could very well start Zach Wilson year 2, who missed a chunk of year 1. Elijah Moore, year 2, wide receiver. Garrett Wilson, of course, the rookie out of Ohio State, year 1. Breece Hall is probably going to start at running back, the rookie. That's a young. That almost embarrasses what Jimmy Johnson and the Cowboys did. And what is it, 90, 91, when they finally had, I think it was 91, right? When they finally got Emmett in there to join Troy Aikman and Michael Irvin. They have that type of a potential, but it's always potential with the Jets, right? And they're young. And is the defense good enough to carry that team this year? They're going to have to carry that team. It's going to take these guys a while to figure it out, right? Given the division that they're in, they're going to have to play the Bills twice, maybe a good Miami team twice, and then New England twice, who always gives them problems. When was the last time they beat the Patriots? I just don't see it this year. But if I'm a Jets fan, I think they were right to whoop it up on draft night, because given their position and what they've been going through all these years, it was about as good a night and a good an off season as I suppose as they could hope to have. But I did in all my team by team breakdowns I did in my weekly newsletter, which comes out every Wednesday if you want to sign up for it, folks.
There you go.
At TorontoSun.com. Free in your inbox, 2:30 every Wednesday. I did. Boom. Over 8 weeks, I did I did all 8 divisions, 4 teams a week, right? And I did a little did you know element, and I was even surprised at this. Since the 60s, the Jets have won the AFC East twice, 98 and 2002. Even the Detroit Lions have won their division, whether it's the NFC North or the NFC Central at the time. They've won it 3 times, more than the Jets. How can that even be possible, right? So if you're a Jets fan and you happen to be somehow stumbled onto our broadcast here tonight or our podcast, maybe there is hope for your team. I just don't see it this year. They're just too young, and they've got growing pains to go through.
Yeah, I agree. One of the best drafts of anyone, but that's to be expected when you have 4 top 40 picks, 3 in the first round.
Better be, right?
At that. Yeah, you better get better on paper. That's true. And now I think you've hit upon it a little bit, but in your opinion, what's the biggest concern for the Bills this season? Maybe it's not on the field with a player. Maybe it's a coaching transition or change. In your opinion, what's the biggest concern?
I'm interested to see who will be the go-to number 3 wide receiver for Josh Allen this year. I mean, I suppose it could be Isaiah McKenzie. Certainly showed times that, because after the Kansas City game, if there's any doubts, he's for a living fact your number 2 ace wide receiver after Stephon Diggs. I don't think anybody can debate that now. After that, what do you get? 5 touchdowns? What do you get? 4?
4 touchdowns. Gabriel Davis.
Crazy, right? And every one of them was like, all right, this guy's he is the guy. But if you look at over the years, I try to look at, as I kind of mentioned a little earlier, but if you look at over the years, quarterbacks that have 3 really good wide receiver targets, or even if you've got a Gronk who can almost be like as effective as a good wide receiver, not just a dump off tight end. But if you have 3 downfield options from your wide receiver position that are dangerous and can get open, I think that takes your offense to another level. I believe that since the year that convinced me was 2011 with the New York Giants. They had, I'm not going to be able to remember them now, Mario Manningham and a couple other veterans that.
Oh, yeah, they had some good guys on that team.
Did they have Toomer on the team?
I think it was post-Toomer.
Post-Toomer.
As the Michigan guy, I can remember that Mario Manningham.
David Tyree, was he in the mix there?
He might have been. And then wasn't it Cruz?
Victor Cruz,
Victor Cruz, and then somebody else. At any rate, he had 3 that year, and I don't remember him having those kind of options years before and after. And then he wouldn't look back, and there's Tyree and Toomer and somebody else in 2007. I thought, well, maybe that's kind of something that really helps a quarterback. If you can't lock, maybe you can lock down 2 of them, but you can't take away the 3rd and the 4th. And in the years where Brady has had those. The plethora of options that you go, if you cover Edelman, fine. I'll throw it to Amendola on the little slant for the 3rd and 4 to get the first down that ends EJ Manuel's first game with the Bills back in 2013. I always remember that, just a stupid little dump off slant. But everybody else,
Hakeem Nicks, was that it?
Everyone else, that's it. That's exactly what it was. Yes.
There you go, Levi on YouTube.
Pulls it out.
Big guy. Way to go. There it is.
But if you've got 3, so for the Bills, who you guys tell me, who do you think that number 3, the best chance of that is?
Well, could it be? Can you consider Dawson Knox? Can you go tight end? If not, maybe it's Jamison Crowder. Matt, what do you think?
I think looking at the Kansas City model, I mean, they thrived off of a wide receiver, 2 wide receivers, depending on, like, really the blueprint for the Kansas City Chiefs was when they had Sammy Watkins and Tyreek Hill, their top 2 guys, and then Kelsey as that 3rd guy. And at times Kelsey was their top guy, depending on what year, what game. So I think it can happen, but I don't know. I'm a very big believer in what I think McKenzie can be for this offense. We've been talking about it the last couple of weeks on the show. If you look at the way that this thing's been constructed, Jamison Crowder kind of comes in that Cole Beasley role, right? Which kind of diminished a little bit last year. But you take all the off the field stuff aside, just that role in the offense wasn't as, highlighted as it's been in the years past.
For sure.
And I think Gabriel Davis was that 3rd guy behind Emmanuel Sanders at times and Stephon Diggs, kind of that utility guy that can do everything. I think McKenzie kind of slots into that role. Crowder can play that role of Beasley, and then you kind of let everybody else fight it out for what other opportunities there will be. I think Khalil Shakir is a guy that they really like in the 5th round this year. He's got to prove it over the next few weeks, few months, but I think he can maybe find himself a role. And, they have a lot of talent. It's just, to your point, maybe we're not thinking about it enough, without that other established big name, unless you want to consider McKenzie that. He's been in this offense with Allen the longest, going back to 28.
The second Patriots game that he just was catching.
Exploded.
Exploded. All game long. That was almost like his Kansas City game, like it was for Gabriel Davis, as far as, putting his hat in the ring for this position that we're talking about. One area that, or one acquisition of that, a lot of people aren't talking about much at all. I don't know how much you guys might have done it so far. And that is OJ Howard. This guy,
a little bit about that, yeah.
He's got all this talent. Everyone thought he is going to be like the next star tight end in the NFL. Just didn't do it. Kept waiting. Oh, now Brady's there in Tampa Bay. Now he'll become this guy. It didn't happen. did he just need a change of scenery, as some players do, in a different area? Maybe this is an offense and an environment and a culture where he can thrive. I'm interested to see because the guy's got talent. He's got talent galore, and he's overcome injuries the last couple of years. But could he be sort of a missing link, perhaps, for the offense as just a guy that picks you up some big plays or some big first downs? If you've got two tight ends now, then again that changes the offense and takes it potentially to another level.
Some people were not happy with my reporting out of minicamp and OTAs, that there was a little bit of a sluggish nature to OJ Howard's game. I was expecting a little bit more athleticism. But again, part of that is the process of learning a new playbook. The Bills' offense is very complicated. Emmanuel Sanders said that last year. So there's kind of like a malaise, I think, for a lot of these guys that come on in year one early on. And it's almost like they're going half speed in the half speed drills even, So I made sure to mention that. But some people thought I was dumping on him. It definitely wasn't that. It'll be interesting once things, he has now 6 weeks to dive into that playbook, get really, comfortable with it. We'll see it here in the next month if it starts to go to that next level. But I think that's a really good observation. I don't want to hold you up. Go ahead.
Just to take it back to our kids just a little bit here, and that is, it's fun when you're talking to, baseball parents or soccer parents or whatever. And the one thing is true of all sports, and I think it's at all levels, not certainly to the degree in the NFL, but as soon as the mind is unsure, the feet stop. Right? And so if somebody looks sluggish, if they're not sure what they're doing, it's like, should I be going over there? The feet stop. That's when they're not sure what they're doing. So if it's just a matter of learning a playbook and shedding a few off-season pounds, who knows? I'm not saying I'm predicting that he could be great or will be, but I think there's a potential there.
And very important to note, he is coming off, he came back and played last season, but coming off of those leg injuries, it takes time. And, you still probably want to be careful with that. So it'll be fun. OJ Howard will be somebody really fun to cover over the next few weeks, preseason training camp. All right. Before I let you out of here, I don't want to keep you too much longer. I want to hit on Deshaun Watson because your thoughts on this whole situation. It's something that, since you cover the NFL, it's something you've obviously been following very closely. The impact of this situation on the league is one thing. And then the impact of the suspension on just how these kinds of cases are treated is another thing. Where do you think we're headed? And if Deshaun Watson can play at any point this season, what does that mean for the Browns? Where does that place them in the AFC? And wherever you want to start with it, I guess. It's a lot.
I'm not going to get too deep into my thoughts on what happened because, there's certainly a lot of circumstantial evidence. And the man hasn't been taken to court and hasn't been convicted or even got to a point where there's enough evidence that they think they can take him to court for a trial. So that's one point I want to make. Secondly, why are you seeking out, according to the New York Times, was it 60 different massage therapists? And it wasn't just massage therapists, it was other things as well. It seems as though he was searching for more than just a massage. Now, what does that then warrant as far as the civil suits, that most of which he has now settled? And then how does that reflect on the league or the whole nature of why he faces the suspension, which is basically their mandate of any player that or employee of the league that brings disrepute to the league. You're going to potentially be suspended. So will he be? I think we could argue all of the back and forth on that all night long, I suppose. But it looks as though some kind of punishment is coming. And the NFL is going back to Ray Rice and other things. They are certainly pushing for a report, say, for a year. And I don't think that would be wrong at all if he had a year. And some would certainly argue that that wouldn't even be enough. But the man's has signed a contract 2 months ago, or 3 months, I guess now, for almost $250 million. And the Cleveland Browns have put everything here. They got rid of a number 1 draft pick of just 4 years ago who just played hurt. I've got a lot of criticisms of Baker Mayfield, but he was clearly hurt in about 3-4 of the games I watched and was not I mean, you just have to look at the season before when, you know, they practically beat and almost by right should have beaten the Chiefs in Kansas City a year before the Bengals did it in the playoffs. So they got rid of that guy for Deshaun Watson. And is Watson that much more talented than Baker Mayfield? Maybe root talent-wise. Has he proved on the field he can be a consistently great quarterback? I don't believe he ever has. I mean, I might get a lot of people criticizing him for that, but I thought he was kind of hit and miss within games. And Bills fans all know the playoff game 2 years ago, the wild card game. What did he do in the first 2.5 quarters? Nothing. And then, you know, with a few magical plays and a bit of luck, pulled it out. So I think that game is almost like a microcosm of his career, is that it's very hit and miss. You know, if we're talking roller coaster here, we're going to Cedar Point or Kings Island or whatever, and it's the biggest one that goes high, and then you got big lows too. So what does that mean for the Browns? Long story short, I don't know. I mean, I don't even know if they're going to win. Even if they had Deshaun Watson, I'm not sure, depending on how they call plays this year with Watson instead of an unhealthy Mayfield at quarterback. I don't know if they're going to be that if they were automatically going to rival the Bengals anyway. The Bengals are better this year, and they just about won a Super Bowl. And I'm not saying that the Bengals are the best team in the conference. I believe the Bills are, followed by the Chiefs and the Bengals probably pretty closely. But the Bengals' big thing was the offensive line, and their offensive line is better and maybe appreciably better this year. So their defense, they've got almost the whole defense back, and they spent the draft and a lot of their offseason moves improving that defense too, not just the offensive line. So they might think that they're 20% better, perhaps the Bengals coaches think that they are this year. So what were the Browns going to do with Deshaun Watson this year other than maybe disappoint their fans another year? It doesn't take much to disappoint them. So it almost maybe gives everybody in Cleveland, which is maybe what they need, their whole leadership, Andrew Berry, the GM, and Kevin Stefanski, the head coach, maybe just gives them a longer rope to try to get this figured out with one of the most impatient owners in the league. I believe I had a note in the Did You Believe of the Cleveland Browns, my piece on them, that Berry and Stefanski together going into this year now are the longest serving duo of a GM head coach that the Browns, I think, have had since the 80s. And it's 4 years. So it's like less than Bean and McDermott is already setting 21st century records with the Cleveland Browns, right? So I don't think that they have to win this year, whether they have him or not. And my hunch is that he'll be suspended for most of the season, if not all.
Yeah, and John, even if they did have Watson for the entire season in some crazy scenario, is it unfair to say that they're probably still the third best team in that division? Because the Ravens, you mentioned it earlier, they were dropping like flies last year. You're going to have J.K. Dobbins back at running back. Obviously, most importantly, Lamar Jackson back there. They still have three really good tight ends on that roster, and that's been the bread and butter for that offense over the last few years too. So with the Bengals being the leaders of the division, with Baltimore coming back with all this talent that they lost 1 year ago, and even the Steelers, yes, there's some questions about that quarterback play, but they still have some talent there too. Is it far-fetched to believe that the Browns wouldn't have finished third or even been fighting for last in that division?
Yeah, I believe what you just said totally, Ryan. I think the Ravens, they were leading the division going into November, if I recall correctly, before the floor, once the secondary, they lost their top players in the secondary to match all the other injuries that they had, mostly on offense. That was it. They lost most of their games down the stretch. But they also had if not the best offseason of any team in the league. You look at the draft, it fell perfectly for them all the way down. Getting the Notre Dame safety, the number one safety. You could argue that I forget the names, but in the players right now, but I think they had 3 or 4 players that you could argue was the best at their position that they drafted as you go down the list. And then they brought in some pieces. Now as you said earlier, they need wide receivers, but is there any team in the league that isn't as screaming, crying for them to make their offense work like the Ravens? They need, they've got the tight end and I think that the Ravens are going to be a lot better. And if they don't make the playoffs, it's only going to be because the AFC has quarterbacks palooza. Just look at the AFC West for quarterbacks. Derek Carr got Devontae Adams, and he's still probably only going to be regarded as the fourth best or fourth most productive quarterback in that division, right? After Russell Wilson and Patrick Mahomes and Justin Herbert with the Chargers, who's spectacular. So the Ravens will be better for sure, and I think they'll surprise people.
I am excited to cover this NFL season. Hopefully, get to see you in person, John Kryk. Have you been back to the States since the borders have reopened?
Not for work yet. Not
all right.
All right. You know, with the lockdowns and everything having ended, right, for good. I'm hoping to be able to make it down to at least some of the Bills home games this year, if not all of them, as usual, pre-pandemic, going back to 2012 that I've been doing this, and then hopefully, you know, playoffs after that and Super Bowl, but and other league events, which I, you know, scouting combine and all the other things that I usually go to. It'll be nice to be able to have the opportunity to do those things this coming season. This season, you know, we talked about it briefly, just about the AFC other quarterbacks. There has been so much intrigue with that flurry of trades in March. Was there ever a more news-packed March in this league than this past year's as far as player movement and acquisitions? And so now we've just been kind of almost like running on the treadmill in one spot now for 5 months. Can't wait for all this to get going.
Indeed. You mentioned the newsletter. Floor is yours. Shout out anything where people can find your work and anything that you got coming up that you want people to be ready for. Sure.
Well, I work for the Post Media, which owns almost all big major dailies in Canada, including the Toronto Sun. This is where I started many years ago, and even many decades ago. But if you go to torontosun.com as one of our websites, of the many of all those dailies, they'll have my copy there. You can read my stories there, and if you just go to that torontosun.com and then just follow the links from sports to football to NFL, and my copy will be there throughout the season, as it always is. And there's a new newsletter that I started in January where I'm just kind of hitting out at various things. I did this little project of trying to be on top of all these teams over the last 8 weeks. And I hope that those will eventually get into the paper in an edited form, which means that they'll go online, and then I can send out those links eventually. But you could just go to torontosun.com, and in the balcony there'll be rotating ads, and then you'll see for newsletters, mine will be there, and you can just click on that. And in your inbox every Wednesday, 2:30, you'll get my my quirky thoughts on things, Bills, NFL-wise, all through the season.
John, thank you so much. We really appreciate having you on today.
I always enjoy it, guys. This was the best one yet. A lot of fun. Thanks.
Awesome. All right. So for everybody else, Value Home Centers has a loyalty program. It's called Best Rewards. Customers earn points for purchases every day that will bring them more savings. Veterans and active military, you earn double points on every purchase every day. Head over to valuehomecenters.com for more information. They actually have their weekly ad out. I was just taking a look at it, Ryan, before we started. Grill Pro 4-burner stainless steel 40,000 BTU gas grill normally goes for $330. It's on sale for $299. You can get that right now. They also have a DeWalt drill. It looks like $60 savings right now. You can get it for $99. A lot of savings to be had over at Value, Ryan.
Not to mention maybe some of the coupons that they can get going to the text program, Matt, that you mentioned earlier in the show.
Big news. And sorry, I don't want to keep you here, John, but we have a live show coming up. We're going to have more about this next week, but we are going to be live in person at Resurgence Brewery, downtown Buffalo next Friday. We're going to have a couple special guests that we're lining up. We're excited for that. But if you want to watch us, we'll be live on all of the channels. You can also come to Resurgence, meet us in person, check out the show. It's going to be a really cool production. I went over there today, check out the space. We're really excited about it. Ryan, you set it up. I mean, it's going to be a fun time. We're going to get you to Buffalo, which is big news.
Yeah, always a good time. I can already taste the on the tea sour, Matt. I'm ready. I am ready for Resurgence Brewery and this podcast.
All right. Hit that like button, subscribe before you go. We'll be back next Wednesday. 2 shows. Andrew Galarno from the Buffalo News, Jenna Cottrell from Rochester. They're going to be on the show on Wednesday, and then we'll have the live show on Friday. And then, Ryan, we have a live show on Sunday when training camp kicks off. Take care, everybody.